I have filed 2,847 field observation reports in my career. I have documented species that eat their own wounded. Species that abandon offspring at the first sign of resource scarcity. Species that will, without hesitation, trade a comrade's life for an extra ration packet and sleep soundly afterward. I considered a thorough chronicler of what living things do when the math stops working in their favor. Then, I watched a human soldier, starving, bleeding through a field dressing she'd rewrapped 4 times because she only had one pull out her last protein bar. Look at it. Look at the juvenile alien refugee child crouched 6 meters away in the rubble, making that sound. That particular frequency of hungry and terrified that apparently exists in every species in the known galaxy, because my chest did something involuntary when I heard it. And, then, she'd the human she made her decision face. I know it now. I didn't know it then. It looks like nothing. It looks like someone doing math. She held the bar out. The child took 3 full seconds to believe it was real. I sat in my observation post and I did something I have never once done in 2,847 reports. I stopped writing. What I could not understand, not yet, was that I had just watched the opening move of something that would end a war. Not the giving. What came after the giving? This is a 4-part account. I have submitted it under oath. High Command may do with it what they will. Senior Observation Officer Threskel, 3rd Auxiliary, Contested Zone 9. I should explain, first, what I was doing there. Not because it is relevant to the larger account, it isn't, particularly, but because if I don't establish it up front, my commanding officer will spend 3 paragraphs of her response asking, and she has a particular way of typing the phrase, "Please clarify your operational justification," that makes me feel like I'm being dissolved molecule by molecule through the data screen. I was there because Observation Station Keth-4 had a water recycler that had been making a sound, not a bad sound, exactly, more of a sound that, if you had spent 11 years working in field stations, you would recognize as the kind of sound that precedes a significantly worse sound, and I had been the one to notice it, and I had been the one to mention it, and, somehow, in the way that things go in the 3rd Auxiliary, that had become my problem to fix. So I was in Keth-4. Keth-4 was positioned at the edge of the contested transition zone, the stripe of bombed-out urban sprawl that used to be the city of Verithos before governance decided that it was strategically necessary to turn it into a cautionary tale about what happens to cities that exist inconveniently between 2 armies. What was left of it was approximately 40 city blocks of collapsed infrastructure, rerouted sewage, and the kind of silence that isn't actually silence but is instead the absence of everything that used to be there. The humans had a unit somewhere in the southern sectors. We knew that. The Cathral Collective, the opposing force, knew that. Everyone knew that. The humans had been embedded in those ruins for what my logs tell me was 6 weeks and 4 days, which meant they had been surviving in that bombed-out stretch of former city for longer than any tactical projection had suggested was possible, which had become something of an embarrassment to the projections department, who had since stopped making projections about what humans would do and had replaced those projections with a single notation that read, in official translation, results. Unpredictable. See previous. I was not there to observe the humans. I want to be clear about that. I was there to fix a water recycler. The child was not supposed to be there either. That, I think, is the relevant starting point. The evacuation corridors had been open for 11 days. The civilian extraction was supposed to be complete. The northern sectors had been cleared, the southern approach had been declared safe for movement, and the administrative record showed, I want to stress, that the transitional zone was empty of non-combatants. The administrative record was wrong. This is not, in my experience, unusual. The administrative record is often wrong about the transitional zone. The transitional zone has a way of accumulating things that the administrative record has decided no longer exist: unexploded ordnance, compromised structural supports, old comms relays running on backup power, and, apparently, one juvenile Bashari refugee who had gotten separated from an extraction convoy 8 days prior and had been surviving in the rubble with the particular resourcefulness that hungry, frightened children everywhere seemed to manufacture from nothing. I became aware of the child because the child was making noise. Not large noise. Not the kind of noise that activates threat response, nothing with that frequency, nothing with that pitch. Smaller. The kind of noise that you notice when you are alone in a half-destroyed observation station pretending to repair a water recycler, and the silence around you is wrong because something in it is alive. I found the source through the monitoring array. Sector 7C. A collapsed overhang, the kind that used to be an exterior wall before physics intervened. Under it, in the narrow triangle of shadow and debris, something small was pressed against the remaining concrete. Vishari juvenile. Approximately, and I want to stress I am not trained in xenopediatric assessment, approximately 4 to 6 years of age, based on comparative scale data. Mottled gray-green coloration suggesting stress response. Intermittent vocalization at a frequency I can only describe as the sound of something that has stopped expecting things to get better but hasn't yet stopped hoping. I noted it in my log. Timestamped 1447 local. I flagged it for civilian extraction follow-up. I filed the procedural form. And then, I watched. Because HFY had a functioning long-range visual array, and I had fixed the water recycler faster than I'd expected, and the honest answer to why I kept watching is that the sound the child was making was the kind of sound that does something to your chest that you don't invite and can't evict. The human appeared at 15:02. I almost missed her. She came in low, moving along the line of collapsed wall that ran the length of Sector 7, and she moved the way I had by then spent enough time observing humans to recognize as deliberate movement in a hostile area which looks, counterintuitively, like someone who is almost not moving at all. Small adjustments. Weight placed carefully. Head in constant micromotion, scanning in a pattern I had spent 2 weeks trying to predict and eventually given up on, noting only that it appeared irregular and noting further that the irregularity might itself be the pattern. She was wearing full field kit. The humans had been in that rubble for 6 weeks, and the kit showed it. The load-bearing vest had a long tear along the left side that had been secured with what my enhanced optics identified as 3 separate materials: original field repair tape, then a strip of something that had definitely not started its life as field repair tape, and then what appeared to be a length of wire threaded through the edges. The field dressing on her left forearm was, as I noted earlier, on its 4th application. I could tell because each layer had been folded before rewrapping, the overlaps offset to maximize coverage, and the outermost layer had a darkness at the center that was not dirt. Her designation, I would learn later, was Sergeant Yara Osemensa, 4th Forward Reconnaissance, which had been a unit of 11 soldiers 6 weeks ago and was currently a unit of 4. I did not know any of this at 15:02. At 15:02 she was simply a human moving through debris in a way that suggested significant expertise and a body that had been having a fairly sustained argument with physics about the terms of its continued operation. She stopped. She had heard the child. I watched her go still in a way that was different from the tactical stillness of her approach, less like a calculation and more like a signal she was sending to her own nervous system. One breath visible through the optics. Her head turned by approximately 12 degrees. Then, she moved toward it. The child saw her before she reached the overhang. I have since consulted with a colleague who specializes in multi-species contact psychology, and she told me, somewhat impatiently, because she had been trying to eat lunch, that the initial presentation of a human to a non-habituated juvenile of most species will produce one of 3 responses: fight, flight, or what she called arrested response, which is the behavioral state in which the nervous system cannot decide between the first 2 and defaults to becoming extremely still while it works it out. The child produced arrested response. All the way still. That particular quality of stillness that is more intense than motion. Pressed against the concrete and not breathing in any way I could detect on the monitoring array. The human, Sergeant Osemensa, though I still didn't know her name, stopped outside the overhang. She did not approach further. She sat down in the rubble, somewhat abruptly, in a way that I initially read as physical system failure before I recalibrated and understood it as intentional. She made herself small. Smaller than she had been standing. She sat cross-legged in the dust and broken concrete and put her hands on her knees, palm up, a gesture whose significance I had logged previously from other human observations as something approximating "I am not holding anything I can hurt you with." She looked at the child. The child looked at her. 37 seconds passed. I held my own breath, which is not something I typically do and which I noticed with mild annoyance while it was happening. The human reached into a cargo pocket. What she removed was small enough that I needed to enhance the optics to identify it. A ration bar. Standard human field issue, foil wrapped, approximately the dimensions of my 2 fingers placed side by side. The wrapper had the particular creased and uneven look of something that had been handled many times, examined, put back, examined again, carried through 6 weeks of contested zone on an injured soldier's body. She looked at it for a moment. The look lasted, and I want to be precise about this, because I have replayed the monitoring footage many times since, in the way that you replay something you are still trying to understand, 3 seconds. The look lasted 3 seconds, and, in those 3 seconds, I watched something move across her face that I am not qualified to name with certainty. I have my notes. They say, conflict. Resolution. Something that is not resignation. She held the bar out toward the child. The child's arrested response broke. Not toward the exit. The child leaned forward, maybe 2 centimeters, in the direction of the bar. It was involuntary, I think. The kind of forward lean that a body produces when the body's priorities temporarily override the nervous system's vote on the matter. The human didn't move. She just held the bar out. Patient in a way that I can only describe as the patience of someone who has decided and is not reconsidering. There was nothing tentative about it. The gesture was not an offer with a condition attached to it. The bar was out and it was going to stay out until something happened. 16 seconds. The child moved. Low and cautious, in a way that looked less like trust and more like hunger winning a close argument with fear. Close enough to reach. One hand extended, four-fingered, gray-green, the small hand of something young and recently convinced that reaching for things was more likely to end badly than not. The human kept her hand still. The child took the bar. There was a moment, I am including this because it is in the monitoring record and I don't know what to do with it, a moment where the child's hand closed around the bar and the human's hand was still there, and they were in contact, fingertips and the edge of a foil wrapper, for approximately 2 seconds. The human made a sound. Not a word. A short, low sound from the back of the throat. The humans have many of these, non-lexical vocalizations that do not parse to meaning but clearly carry it, and it was the kind of sound that my colleague would later tell me, again somewhat impatiently, is associated in humans with the emotional state of witnessing something fragile and choosing not to look away from it. The child pulled back with the bar. The human put her now empty hand back on her knee, palm down this time. I noted the time, 15:08. I noted, soldier expended last personal food ration. Method, voluntary transfer. Recipient, non-combatant juvenile, species Vishari, unsanctioned zone presence. No tactical justification. I stared at what I'd written for a while. Here is what I did not write in the initial log, because I was not sure it was relevant, and because I was not sure I had interpreted it correctly, and because, and I want to be honest about this, there was something about it that felt too large for standard observation notation. Before the human sat down. Before the ration bar. In the moment when she first heard the child and paused and her head turned 12 degrees. I had already been watching her for 4 minutes through the long-range array. I had been tracking her movement through the sector, logging her progress, filing it under standard combatant monitoring. I had her biometric readout running on a secondary screen. Her blood glucose indicator, which the third auxiliary's monitoring arrays can detect through ambient thermal reads in controlled conditions, and HFY was sufficiently isolated to qualify, had been sitting at a level that I subsequently looked up in a human physiological reference guide. The guide described that level as moderate hypoglycemia. Associated symptoms may include impaired concentration, tremor, emotional dysregulation, and, in prolonged cases, cognitive disruption. The human was not thinking clearly because she had not eaten enough. She gave the bar away anyway. I have thought about this a great deal since. I keep returning to the 3 seconds. The look she gave the bar before she extended it. The decision that moved across her face like weather. She knew what the bar was worth. She had been in that rubble for 6 weeks. She had been rewrapping the same field dressing. She had been running on a body that was arguing with her about the terms of its continued operation, and she had known exactly what that small foil-wrapped thing represented in practical survival terms. And she did the math. And the math came out the way it came out. The child ate the bar in a corner of the overhang while the human sat in the rubble outside and watched. Not looking directly, I noted this at an angle, the way you watch something you don't want to startle. At 15:23, the human's personal comms activated. I have the audio. It was captured incidentally on Keth4's ambient monitoring, which I had not remembered was running and which captured things in the sector at sufficient resolution. The voice on the comms was another human, terse, lower register, the particular vocal compression of someone communicating under tactical conditions. I have since cross-referenced the voice print and can confirm it was Corporal Nadia Vasquez-Ortiz, one of the remaining 3 members of 4th Forward Reconnaissance. The transmission was approximately 18 seconds long. I have transcribed it in full. Oh, say. Location. We've been sitting on this corner for 40 minutes. Pause. Sector 7 Charlie. Give me a few minutes. A few minutes for what? Is there a contact? Pause. Shorter this time. Negative. There's a kid. Silence on the line that lasted approximately 4 seconds, which, in a tactical comms exchange, is a long time. A kid. Vashari. Young. 6, maybe. Maybe less. Another 4-second silence. Oh, say. I know. We have a sweep in, I know, Vaz. I know. Give me a few minutes. The comms closed. The human, Sergeant Osemensa, sat in the rubble outside the overhang in the late afternoon light of contested Zone 9 and watched, at an angle, a child she had never met finish eating the last thing she owned in the way of food. I have been trying, in the time since, to construct a tactical or strategic justification for what she did. This is not because I think there is one. It is because I have now submitted this report 3 times and, each time it has come back with a notation requesting that I provide operational context for the observed behavior, and I think what my commanding officer means by operational context is a reason that makes sense in terms of resource management and unit effectiveness. I cannot provide that. What I can provide is this: the human gave the bar away in a contested zone while malnourished and, under operational pressure with no possibility of resupply in the immediate window and, with full awareness of what she was doing, because there was a child who was hungry. That is the complete account. There is no subclause. There is no strategic calculus I have found that absorbs this event and produces a rational output. I have consulted the tactical behavior models we use for human combatant prediction, the ones that replaced the projection models after the projection models started producing outputs the projections department was too embarrassed to submit, and those models do not have a category for this. The closest category is designated PAC loyalty extension, which describes the documented human behavior of extending resource sharing and protective behaviors beyond the immediate unit to non-unit individuals when specific environmental triggers are present. I have a note next to this category in my personal files, which I wrote approximately 2 weeks into my current posting, that says, range of PAC appears to be functionally unlimited under correct conditions. No upper bound identified. Do not attempt to model. I wrote that note as an observation. At 15:08, watching a starving soldier hand a ration bar to a child she'd known for 60 seconds, I started to think it might be a warning. At 15:41, the child fell asleep. Children do this. It's a thing they do when they've eaten and they feel, for whatever reason, instinct, perhaps, or that other thing, the thing that looks like instinct but is actually an evaluation that is faster than conscious thought, safe enough to stop holding their nervous system at emergency levels. The child fell asleep in the corner of the overhang. The human sat outside. At 15:48, her comms activated again. Vasquez-Ortiz. Oh, say. Sweep starts in 12. Copy. Is the kid still there? Asleep. Another tactical silence. We can't take her with us. I know. If we call it in for extraction, I know, Vaz. I filed an extraction flag 40 minutes ago. It's logged. Okay. Okay. Comms closed. I checked my own secondary screen. The extraction flag had been filed at 15:09. 1 minute after the ration bar changed hands. She had filed it first and sat down second, which meant the decision had been made in the order: get this child out, and then stay with this child until that happens. This is not, I want to be clear, procedure. The procedure in cases of discovered non-combatant presence in the transitional zone is to file the flag, mark the location on the grid, and continue the operational objective. The procedure does not say, stay. Sergeant Osemensa sat in the rubble outside the overhang and waited for a child she'd known for 60 seconds to wake up, and she waited the way you wait when you have decided that the child is not going to wake up alone. At 16:09, the long-range array picked up movement in Sector 8. K-Thral. A forward scout unit, 3 individuals, based on thermal signatures, moving in the cautious, methodical pattern I had logged under hostile reconnaissance. They were running a grid sweep. Systematic. Moving toward Sector 7C, toward the overhang. Toward the child. I flagged it immediately in my log. I noted the time. I noted the bearing and estimated intercept. I noted, and I am going to include this in the report regardless of how it reads, that my hands were not entirely steady when I was doing the notating. The human's comms activated before I could finish the log entry. Her own sensors, then. Or she had heard them. I have subsequently spent a considerable amount of time trying to determine which, and I have not been able to resolve it, and I have decided that either possibility is interesting in a way that I am not entirely prepared to sit with. The voice on the comms this time was different. A third human, Corporal Alinta Watsonberg, the fourth surviving member, who I would later identify as the unit's designated field medic. Oh, say. Contacts, Sector 8. 3 bogies running a sweep, bearing 265. I see them. They'll cross into 7 in 7 minutes. I know. You need to move. A silence that lasted exactly 1 second. The kid's still asleep. Ose, she'll make noise if I move her without warning her. She doesn't know me, Alinta. She'll make noise and they'll have a vector. Another silence. Watsonberg processing. So what's the play? I'm working on it. Comms closed. I watched Sergeant Osemensa sit in the rubble of Sector 7C with 3 K-Thral scouts 6 minutes from her position and a sleeping child behind her, and I watched her think. It did not look like panic. I want to record that specifically. The biometric array showed elevated cardiac rate, elevated cortisol indicators, all the physiological signals that I would associate in any species with a high-threat response. The body was doing what bodies do when they understand that the situation is bad. But she sat in the rubble. And she thought. And then she did something I did not expect, and which took me several minutes after the fact to understand, and which I have since identified as the moment when this account stopped being a log entry about a ration bar and became something else entirely. She reached into a different cargo pocket. She removed a small object, flat, metallic, approximately palm-sized, and set it on the rubble beside her. She picked up a fragment of broken concrete. She started, very slowly and very quietly, to tap. Not a signal I recognized. Not a pattern from any comms protocol in any database I have access to. A short sequence, 3 short, 1 long, a pause, 2 short, repeated at an interval I would describe as slightly slower than a resting heartbeat. Rhythmic. Consistent. Not loud. At the edge of audibility even on the enhanced monitoring array, which meant it was operating at the precise threshold between I can hear this and I cannot locate the source of this. The child stirred. Not awake. Surfacing. That particular quality of movement that means the body is approaching consciousness and the environment is being sampled before the mind decides whether to complete the process. The tapping continued. 3 short, 1 long, pause, 2 short. 3 short, 1 long, pause, 2 short. The child's eyes opened. The human did not move. Did not turn. Did not look. Kept tapping. The child looked at the human's back. The child looked at the small metallic object on the rubble. The tapping continued. 1 minute and 17 seconds. I have the footage of that soft, steady rhythm in the ruined silence of Sector 7C, while 3 Cathral scouts moved 4 minutes closer through Sector 8. And then, the child, slowly, moved to the entrance of the overhang and sat down beside the human. Not touching. A cautious, specific distance. The distance of I am near you, and I have decided, provisionally, on the basis of insufficient evidence, that near you is safer than not near you. The human tapped. 3 short, 1 long, pause, 2 short. The child watched the metallic object. The human moved the metallic object, pushed it, with 1 finger, toward the child. The child picked it up. Tapped it. Wrong. Not the sequence. Random. The human did not correct it. She tapped the concrete again, 3 short, 1 long, pause, 2 short, and waited. The child listened. Tapped again. Closer. 3 short, 1 long, pause, a hesitation, 1 short. 1 short. The human tapped the sequence back. Then, tapped just the missing beat. 2 short. A demonstration, not a correction. The child tapped 2 short. 3 short, 1 long, pause, 2 short. 3 short, 1 long, pause, 2 short. The human stopped tapping. The child tapped the complete sequence. The human made the low, non-lexical sound. The one from earlier. And then, quietly, she said something I have not been able to fully translate, but which my linguistic database renders approximately as, "There you go." The tone is not in the database. The tone is the whole thing. At 1614, 4 minutes and 30 seconds before the Cathral scouts would enter Sector 7, Sergeant Osemensa's comms activated one more time. Watson Burke. Oh, say. We're repositioned. We can draw them south, but you need to move now. Copy. Moving now. The kid? A 3-second pause. With me. Ose, we can't, she knows the sequence. She's quiet. She's fast. She's with me, Alinta. Silence. Copy, said Watson Burke. I watched Sergeant Osemensa stand up from the rubble. I watched her hold out one hand, palm up, to the child sitting beside her. I watched the child, who had eaten a stranger's last food and learned a stranger's sequence and sat beside a stranger in the ruins while a stranger's people argued about the odds. Look at that hand. Look at it. Put the metallic object carefully in a pocket. Take the hand. I noted the time, 1614 local. I noted, Unit 4FR moving south through Sector 7C. 1 additional. Extraction flag active. Contact threat imminent. I noted, because it was in the record and, I believe in complete records, that my chest was doing the thing again. The involuntary thing that the sound had started at 1447 when I first picked up the child on the array. It was doing it differently now. I have not yet found the right notation for the difference. The Cathral scouts entered Sector 7 at 1619. They found an empty overhang. Debris. Dust. A specific pattern of scuff marks in the dust that I could read from the overhead array and that the scouts apparently could not, which told me which direction a small person and a soldier had gone but which told the scouts nothing at all. The scouts cleared the sector and moved on. At 1623, I received confirmation from the Extraction Coordination Queue, flag active, Sector 7C, 1 juvenile Bashari, non-combatant. Priority elevated per updated civilian protocols. Team en route, ETA 0340 next operational period. The flag. Filed at 1509. 1 minute after a ration bar changed hands in the rubble of Verith OSS. I finished my water recycler report. I submitted the maintenance log. I ran the standard end-of-shift checks on the KETH4 systems, which were functioning correctly and were going to continue to function correctly and which did not need me specifically to continue to function correctly. I sat at the monitoring station for a while after. 3 short, 1 long, pause, 2 short. Not a code. Not a signal. A rhythm. A reason to listen instead of run. I have thought, since, about the 3 seconds. The look she gave the bar. The math. I think now that I misread what she was calculating. I thought she was calculating what the bar was worth. I think she was calculating something else. I think she was calculating what she was worth. And, I think I am not a behavioral specialist and, I am not certain, but, I have 2,847 field reports and, a water recycler I fixed faster than I expected and, a long evening in a monitoring station where I had nothing to do but, watch and, think. I think the math came out the same way it always does, for her. And, I think the answer was, more if I give it away. The coffee at Keth 4 is made from something that is technically coffee in the way that a collapsed building is technically still a building, the raw material is present but, the structural integrity is gone. I mention this because I have now consumed 6 cups of it since the previous part of this account, and, I believe it is responsible for the quality of my current thinking, which feels like a data processing unit that has been running at maximum capacity for 72 hours and, is making questionable decisions about which processes to keep active. I have also, in those 6 cups, replayed the monitoring footage from Sector 7C 41 times. I want that number in the record. 41. Not because I think it makes me seem thorough, I think it makes me seem like someone who cannot stop watching something they don't fully understand, but, because when I eventually explain what happened in the 6 hours after the previous part of this account ended, I want there to be a clear record of the fact that I was not watching casually. I was watching the way you watch when you are certain something is being said to you and, you cannot yet hear the language. It was approximately 2,200 local when Sergeant Osei Mensah walked back into my monitoring range. She did not come alone. This was already a deviation from any tactical model I had running. 4th Forward Reconnaissance had been operating on a strict contact minimization protocol, the kind of protocol that a 4-person unit survivors of an 11-person unit adopt not from orders but from arithmetic. Every new contact was a new variable. Every new variable was a new way for something to go wrong. The protocol was not written anywhere in their comms traffic. It was written in the way they moved. So when the long-range array picked up her movement signature at 2200, and I reconfigured the array to track, and I identified the 3 secondary signatures behind her, the 3 surviving members of 4th Forward Reconnaissance, together, which was not how they had been operating, I noted this. And, then, I noted that she was leading them somewhere specific. And, then, I noted where. Sector 7C. The overhang. I have been trying to determine what operational reason there might be for returning to a location that had been cleared by hostile scouts, at night, as a full unit rather than a solo operator. I have considered and discarded resupply cache, none registered in the sector, secondary extraction point, none logged, comms relay check, there is no comms relay in Sector 7. I have consulted the tactical movement models. The models have no category for this. They were going back because the child had been there. I don't mean they expected the child to still be there. The extraction flag was active, the window was 0340, and they would know the protocol. The child would be collected, transported, processed through civilian aid, removed from the contested zone. The child would not be in the overhang at 2200. They went back anyway. This is the kind of thing that, when I try to explain it to my commanding officer, produces the notation, please clarify operational justification. And, I cannot clarify it. What I can say is that 4 humans who had been operating in rubble for 6 weeks, thin and tired and running on field rations that one of them was now short of, walked back to an empty space under a broken wall at night, and they did it because something had happened there. I could hear the conversation on the ambient array. I want to note that I did not activate any enhanced surveillance protocols. The ambient array was running on standard passive collection, the kind that does not require authorization, the kind that does not constitute directed monitoring, the kind that my commanding officer will accept as incidental capture without requesting the 8-page justification form. The conversation that the ambient array captured incidentally was as follows. Corporal Watsonberg arrived at the overhang first, pulled ahead by roughly 2 body lengths, and she stopped at the entrance and was quiet for a moment. Then, she ate it here? Yeah. The whole thing. Pretty fast, actually. A pause. Something in Mensa's voice that I would have to call the vocal equivalent of the 3-second look. She was hungry. Yeah. Watson Burke. Yeah. Silence. The fourth member of the unit, Private Emeka Ose, whose relationship to the sergeant I would subsequently confirm was one of shared surname and nothing else, a coincidence that the unit appeared to find mildly funny when it came up, which was not often, sat down on a piece of rubble and put his head in his hands. Not distress, I think, or not only distress. The posture of someone very tired sitting down. So what was the sequence? This from Corporal Vasquez Ortiz, who had positioned herself at the southwest corner of the overhang in what I recognized as her habit, specifically, of occupying the tactically optimal observation point in any new location, which she did automatically, without appearing to notice she'd done it. What? You said she learned a sequence. What was it? A moment. Then, Mensa tapped on the concrete wall of the overhang, 3 short, 1 long, pause, 2 short. Silence. That's not anything, said Vasquez Ortiz. I know. You made it up. I needed something she could repeat quickly that wasn't a real code. Something just complicated enough to focus on. So she could focus on learning it instead of focusing on, Another silence. The kind of silence that is a thought completing itself. Watson Burke sat down next to Private Ose on the rubble. That's pretty smart, Yara. I was terrified she'd make a sound when the scouts were 4 minutes out and there was nothing I could do about it except give her something to do. Give her something to do. I have, in the past few hours since first transcribing this, turned that exchange over in my head many times. Give her something to do. It sounds simple. It sounds, if you say it quickly, like tactics. Something you might find in a field manual under managing civilian behavior in high-threat environments. But there is no field manual for that, as far as I know. And what Mensa had given the child was not something to do in the way a manual would mean it. What she had given the child was a thing that required actively, not accidentally, sitting close enough to another living thing to listen. Repeating something back. Being corrected and trying again. A small negotiation, conducted in rhythm, between 2 people who did not share a language, in the ruins of a city in the dark, with scouts 4 minutes away. Give her something to do was one way to say it. Give her a reason to trust me was another. I wrote both in my notes. I have not yet decided which one is more accurate. I have started to think they might be the same thing. At 22:47, Corporal Vasquez Ortiz said, "She'll be extracted at 0340. Not a question. That's the window, said Mensa. Think she'll remember? A pause. The sequence? You. The longest pause in the conversation to that point. 11 seconds. I counted. I don't know, said Mensa. She's young enough that she might not. Does that bother you? 12 seconds. I don't know. Yara. I don't know, Vaz. I know she ate. I know she had a few hours where she wasn't alone. I know she got out. A breath. That's enough. That has to be enough. Vasquez Ortiz said nothing. After a moment, it doesn't feel like enough. No, said Mensa. It doesn't. Silence. Then, Vasquez Ortiz, flat and dry, in the tone I had come to recognize as her preferred register. For the record, I thought about giving her mine. What stopped you? You beat me to it. Something that was not quite a laugh from at least 2 of them. Short, involuntary, the kind of sound that is the body's release valve when the pressure has been at a level that the body doesn't have another option for. I hate this sector, said Private Ose, from under his hands. I hate this whole zone, said Watson Burke. I hate this war, said Vasquez Ortiz, with the exact same inflection she might have used to say I hate this coffee, which told me either that she had made peace with it or that she had been saying it long enough that it had worn a groove in her and now came out automatically, which might not be different from making peace with it. Yeah, said Mensa. And that was the end of that conversation. They did not leave. This is the part that I am going to have the most difficulty explaining to my commanding officer, and I have preemptively drafted 3 different versions of the explanation, none of which fully satisfy me. The simplest version is this: the extraction window for the child was 0340. Fourth forward reconnaissance remained in or near Sector 7C from 2200 until 0340. They maintained a watch rotation, I tracked the position changes, and they were alert, and they were armed, and their positioning covered the approaches to the extraction point from 3 of the 4 vectors that a hostile incursion might use. They waited. For a child they'd known for a few hours. In a sector that had already been swept by hostile scouts once. In the middle of a contested zone. Through a night that the weather system was doing something unfriendly to the ambient temperature dropped 12 degrees by 0100 and the monitoring array began picking up a precipitation event that I can only describe as the weather also having opinions about the situation. Watson-Burke treated Jose Mensa's arm at approximately 0015. I could see it on the thermal array, the specific positioning of field medical work, the particular stillness of a patient who was trying not to react. The field dressing came off. Something happened that I could not see clearly, but that Jose Mensa's biometrics registered as significant physical discomfort. A new dressing went on. The process took 19 minutes. At 0040, the ambient array captured the following brief exchange between Jose Mensa and Private Jose: "You don't have to stay." "I know. Emeka." "I know, Sergeant. I'm staying." A pause. "Why?" A longer pause. "Because you gave away your last bar and then you stayed, and now it's my turn to stay." Another pause, this one shorter, more decisive. "That's why." I have read that exchange many times. It's my turn to stay. Not I'm staying because we're a unit, or I'm staying because it's tactically sound, or I'm staying because the protocol requires it. None of those things were true. It's my turn to stay. As if staying was a practice. As if one human doing a thing created a debt in another human, not debt in the transactional sense, not a ledger to be balanced, but a different kind of debt, the kind that functions more like hunger. You see someone stay. You feel the pull to stay. You stay. I wrote this in my notes and, then, I sat with it for a while because I think it is, possibly, the most important thing in this entire account. I have been trying, for 11 years, to understand the operational logic of human unit cohesion. Why they die for each other at rates that no tactical model predicts. Why they do things that have no survival value and enormous emotional cost with what appears to be a willingness that is not resignation but something closer to relief. Why a 4-person unit that has lost 7 members in 6 weeks, tired and cold and hungry, sits in the ruins of a city in the rain and waits for a child's extraction window. Because you gave away your last bar. And then you stayed. And now it's my turn. They are not a unit. I mean, they are a unit, technically, in the organizational sense. They have designations and ranks and a chain of command. But the operational logic I have been trying to map onto them is wrong. The model I have been using is wrong. They are not a unit that cooperates for strategic advantage. They are 4 people who keep choosing each other. And somewhere in that choosing, somewhere in the space between you stayed and it's my turn to stay, is something that I suspect is the actual engine of all of it. The 6 weeks in the rubble. The rewrapped field dressing. The ration bar. The something that says, more if I give it away. At 0340, the extraction team arrived. I had been running the monitoring array on maximum sensitivity, so I had 15 seconds of advance warning before the team entered Sector 7, enough time to watch 4th Forward Reconnaissance Titan coalesce, move to ready positions that had the particular quality of "we will see you before you see us" and "we are not the threat but we will be if necessary." The extraction team was 2 individuals from the 3rd Auxiliary Civilian Relief Corps, designation 9CR12, both Kathrani, both experienced, both already looking tired in the way that civilian relief workers in contested zones look tired, which is a specific, practiced, functional tired. Not broken. Operating. They entered Sector 7C. The human unit was visible to them in approximately 4 seconds, emerged from positions that had been invisible to me until the humans chose to emerge from them, which tells me something about the limits of my monitoring array that I have noted for the equipment review. There was a brief exchange, I have the audio, but it was conducted in standard, which both parties spoke, and it was short. Essentially, who are you? We're the ones who flagged her. Where is she? She's a pause in the audio that I can see on the visual record was Ose Mensa looking at the overhang, and then I can see the visual record shows the child emerging from the overhang. Not called. Not prompted. The child had heard them coming before I had detected them on the array, and the child had done the thing that I am still thinking about, had remained hidden until the people she had been with were visible and present in a way that said we are still here. Then, she came out. The extraction team confirmed her identification, a process that I will not detail, but that took approximately 8 minutes and involved several instruments and a great deal of very quiet talking in at least 2 languages, and then one of them picked her up, which the child permitted after a moment that I recognized as the arrested response starting and then stopping because something about the person had passed whatever test the arrested response was running. The second extraction team member turned to fourth forward reconnaissance. You waited here? Ose Mensa, yeah. 6 hours? Approximately. The extraction team member looked at her for a moment. Then, at the other 3. Then, back. In this sector. In this sector. Another moment. Okay, said the extraction team member, in the tone of someone deciding not to ask the next question. We've got her. Thank you. Take care of her. Not a request. Not entirely. The extraction team member appeared to understand this. We will. And then, the extraction team moved, and the child was being carried out of Sector 7C, and I watched on the visual array as the child's head came up over the extraction team member's shoulder and turned back. Looking at the humans. 4 of them, standing in the rubble in the rain at 0340, watching her go. The child tapped something. 3 short, 1 long, pause, 2 short. Ose Mensa tapped back. I have watched this portion of the recording more times than any other. Specifically this moment. The sequence going one direction, and then, the sequence going back. I do not know the word for it in any language I speak. I have a feeling this is because the word would have to do too much work, it would have to carry I remember and, I was here and, you were here and, you stayed and, this happened and, it was real all at the same time, in the space of 6 taps in a made-up code, between 2 people who will probably never see each other again. I do not have a word for that. I wrote in my notes, see if one exists. I have not yet found it. At 0353, after the extraction team was gone, the long-range array showed fourth forward reconnaissance beginning their movement back toward the southern sectors. Standard spacing. Standard pattern. The irregular scanning motion I had spent 2 weeks trying to predict. At 0401, the ambient array captured one final exchange. Vasquez Ortiz, to Ose Mensa, you're hungry. Extremely. I have half a bar. From yesterday. It's the texture of a boot. Give it here. Sharing is caring, Ose. Vaz, I will fight you. You will not, you're exhausted and, your arm is newly dressed and, I outrank, you don't outrank me. I am culturally senior. That's not a rank. I'm making it a rank. Here. Half a boot. Silence, which I read as consumption. That's terrible, said Ose Mensa. I know. Thank you. Yeah. They disappeared from the monitoring range at 0408 local. I sat in Keth 4 for a while after. The water recycler was running correctly. The ambient monitoring array was on passive. The long-range visual array was showing me the empty rubble of Sector 7C, where a few hours ago there had been a child and a soldier and a sequence that wasn't anything except a reason to listen. I made my 7th cup of terrible coffee. I thought about the extraction team member's question. You waited here? 6 hours? The tone of it. Not quite disbelief, they were field workers, they had seen things, but something adjacent. The question underneath the question, which I think was, why? And the answer, which Jose Mensa had not given, and which I think she had not given because it was too large for the context, and which I have been trying to write into this report for several hours, is something like this: because at 1447, a child was making a sound. And, at 1502, a soldier heard it. And, at 1508, a ration bar changed hands. And, at 1614, two people who didn't share a language walked south together through the rubble. And, at 2200, four people came back to the place where it happened. And, at 0040, a tired soldier said it's my turn to stay. And, at 0340, a child came out of hiding on her own, because the people she'd decided to trust were still there. Each moment arrived because the moment before it happened. The ration bar was not a tactical decision, and it was not a strategic calculation, and it was not, I don't think, even a particularly conscious one. It was a soldier with a hypoglycemia reading and 6 weeks of rubble behind her who looked at a hungry child and did the math the only way she apparently knew how. And then, every subsequent moment was the consequence. This is what I could not write in standard observation notation. Soldier expended last personal food ration. That was true. But, the complete account, the thing I have been trying to get into this report since 1508, is that the ration bar was the first sentence of something. I don't know yet what it's the first sentence of. I have more to report. At 0730 local, 9.5 hours after the extraction window, I received a communication. Not my commanding officer. Not the extraction team. Not any of the administrative channels that I had been passively dreading since beginning this account. It was from the Civilian Relief Processing Center, Zone 9 Auxiliary Hub, designated liaison for non-combatant extraction. The communication contained a single piece of information. The child's name. I won't include it in this report. She doesn't belong in an observation record by name, and I am aware that there are places where information about civilian extractions creates risks for those civilians, and I will not do that. But it was her name. 7 characters. A name that existed before the rubble and the overhang and the ration bar, that she had carried through 8 days alone in the ruins of a city that was being argued over by armies that had been there before any of this and would be there after. The communication also contained a secondary note, added by the Relief Center intake processor, which read, "Juvenile was non-communicative on arrival but demonstrated functional distress response management during transport." Intake notes: juvenile tapped a rhythmic sequence repeatedly during medical assessment, appears to be self-soothing mechanism. Pattern unidentified, possibly self-generated. No action required. Possibly self-generated. 3 short, 1 long, pause, 2 short. I read the note 3 times. Then, I drank the rest of my terrible coffee. Then, I put my head down on the monitoring station desk for approximately 6 minutes, which is not something I do and which I am including in this account because I believe complete records are important and because I suspect my commanding officer's notation about operational context is going to seem slightly less coherent to her after she reads this part. The sequence was not self-generated. It was given by a starving soldier in the ruins of Veritho SS who had run out of everything except the specific, particular human capacity to find something to give. I slept for 3 hours and 40 minutes. I know the exact duration because Kethforce systems log all inactive periods by default, and I have developed the habit of checking this number with the specific dread of someone who suspects the number will be smaller than it should be and is always correct. 3 hours, 40 minutes. I made coffee from a facility that does not use whatever Kethfor uses, the transit hub at Zone 9 Auxiliary, which has a machine that produces something technically inferior in quality but which has the significant advantage of not tasting like a decision you regret. I sat down with it and I opened my monitoring logs. I had 14 new items flagged for review. 12 of them were routine. One was a maintenance request for a water filter in Observation Station Keth 7, which I am including in this account solely because I want there to be a record of the fact that the 3rd Auxiliary's approach to assigning repair work is essentially whoever notices the problem acquires the problem, which means my only reward for having working eyes is an increasingly long list of things that require them. The 14th item was not routine. It was a tactical incident report, filed at 0612 local, 6 hours after I had last seen 4th Forward Reconnaissance disappear from the monitoring range. I read it. I read it again. I made a note in my personal log that said, of course. Let me give you the context. The Cathral Collective, the opposing force in contested Zone 9, had been running a particular operational pattern in the southern sectors for the past 11 days. 3 scout units. Overlapping patrol grids. Systematic sweep of the rubble, for hours on, 2 off, consistent enough that the 3rd Auxiliary's Tactical Analysis Division had produced a model of the pattern and had been using that model to route 4th Forward Reconnaissance's movements safely through the contested areas. The model was generated from 48 hours of observation data. The Cathral had been running this pattern for 11 days. The Tactical Analysis Division's model was correct for the first 48 hours. At 0528 local, on the morning of the day that Part 3 begins, the Cathral changed the pattern. Not completely. Not in a way that looked, on a surface read, like a significant change. But, the overlap zones shifted. 2 patrol grids rotated by approximately 40 degrees each. The 4-hour/2 hour cycle compressed to 3-hour/90 minute. Small adjustments. The kind of small adjustments that a tactical analysis division monitoring from a safe distance might not immediately flag as significant. The kind of small adjustments that would close exactly one corridor. One specific corridor. The southern approach through sectors 11 and 12, which was the corridor that the 3rd Auxiliary's tactical routing had been using to move 4th Forward Reconnaissance safely to and from their operational area for the past 3 weeks. The corridor was closed. 4th Forward Reconnaissance did not know it yet. They had left Sector 7C at 0408. They were moving south on the standard route. By the time the Tactical Analysis Division flagged the pattern change and elevated it to an incident report, the unit had been moving for 2 hours. They were 90 minutes from the closure. I want to be very precise about the next sequence of events, because I have reviewed the logs multiple times and there is a part of the sequence that I cannot fully explain and that I am going to include in this report exactly as it appears in the monitoring record, without interpretation, because I think interpretation would reduce it to something smaller than it is. At 0631, 19 minutes after the incident report was filed, the 3rd Auxiliary Comms Center attempted to reach 4th Forward Reconnaissance on their designated channel. No response. They attempted a secondary channel. No response. At 0637, the Comms Center attempted to reach any asset in the southern sectors that had line of sight to the unit's projected position. No line of sight assets available. The Tactical Analysis Division elevated the incident to Priority 2. Not Priority 1, the designation requires confirmed contact, but Priority 2, which means we believe there is a problem and we cannot currently fix it. At 0641, I was reviewing my monitoring logs over Transit Hub Coffee and I reached item 14 and I read it again and I wrote of course in my notes and I did something that I want to be honest about. I sat there for approximately 45 seconds doing nothing. Not because I didn't know what to do. Because knowing what to do and doing it are two different things when the thing you have to do has a specific weight, and the weight of it was sitting on my chest while I stared at the incident report. Then, I did it. I pulled KETH-4's long-range array onto my Transit Hub secondary screen. KETH-4 is positioned at the northern edge of the contested zone. Its array doesn't reach the southern sectors at full resolution. But, it reaches them. I started scanning. Let me be clear about my operational authority here. I am a senior observation officer. My function is observational. I file reports. I monitor systems. I note things in logs. I do not have tactical authority. I do not have communications authority over combatant units. If I detect something in my monitoring array that is relevant to ongoing tactical operations, the correct procedure is to flag it through the incident reporting system and submit the flag to the Tactical Analysis Division. I did flag it. I also, while the flag was processing, started making calls. The first call was to the Zone 9 Comms Center, where I spoke to a duty coordinator whose name I am including as Coordinator Hesk because she is the person most directly responsible for what happened next and she deserves to be named for it. I explained the situation as quickly as I could. Corridor closure, for humans, 90 minutes, and she said something that I will also include in this account. Do we have any assets in the southern sector that can reach them before the closure? I'm checking. There was a pause. I was running the array. She was running her own board. Cat 7 is offline, she said. I know. Maintenance. Cat 9 has coverage, but the long-range arm is, I know. Another pause. Threskel. Cat 4's array reaches Sector 11. I know. At what resolution? Not enough to confirm visual on the unit. But I can reach the relay junction at 11 Delta if it's still active. Check. I checked. The relay junction at Sector 11 Delta was a piece of equipment that had been scheduled for decommissioning 14 weeks ago and had not been decommissioned because nobody had been able to get to Sector 11 to physically remove it, because Sector 11 was in the middle of the contested zone, and the contested zone is not a place you go to do routine equipment decommissioning. The junction was running on its tertiary power cell. Its battery indicator, the last time it had been logged, had read 17%. I pinged it. It responded. 11%. It's alive, I told Coordinator Hesk. Can you bounce a signal through it to the unit's channel? The bounce will degrade the signal. If they're receiving on standard gain, will it work? The honest answer was, maybe. Probably. If the junction didn't drop out. If their equipment was functioning. If the degraded signal was enough. 3 conditional clauses, each carrying enough weight to collapse the whole structure. Yes, I said. Here is what I need to tell you about what happened next. I pushed the bounce signal through the relay junction at 0649. The signal reached the unit's channel. Osemensa's comms received it. She responded. Her voice was compressed by the degraded bounce, fragmented at the edges, but she responded. This is fourth forward. Go. This is Threskel, third auxiliary observation, Ket 4, Ket 4? You're the station at the north edge. Yes. I have a priority message. The southern corridor is closed. Sector 11 and 12, Cathral pattern change as of 0528. Your current route takes you into the closure. You have approximately, I checked the time and the projected position. 70 minutes before intercept. Silence. Not a long silence. 5 seconds, maybe. The silence of someone doing math. What's the new corridor? There isn't one. Not on the current tactical routing. Division is working, what are our options? I had been looking at this. I had been looking at it since I read the incident report. I had the maps and the patrol projections and the Ket 4 array data, and I had been running options since 0641 while I was making the calls. There are 2 options. One is to hold in place and wait for the corridor situation to resolve, which the division is working on but has no timeline for. The other is, I checked my notes. Sector 9 Bravo has a gap in the patrol overlap. It's not a corridor. It's a window. Approximately 40 minutes, starting now, before the overlap closes. If you can get to 9 Bravo in time, you can pass through. 9 Bravo is 2 sectors east of our current position. Yes. Another silence. Longer. I want to record what was in this silence because I was tracking the unit on the monitoring array at maximum resolution while it was happening, and I can tell you what I saw. 4 people in the rubble of the southern transition zone. One of them Osemensa, on the biometric trace, with elevated cardiac indicators and the particular stillness that I had been learning, over 41 replays and several cups of terrible coffee, to read as decision. The other 3 were watching her. Not anxiously. Not impatiently. In the specific, focused way of people who have decided to watch someone make a decision and, then, do whatever the decision says. 9 Bravo, said Osemensa. Yes. We can make it in 40 minutes. The window closes in 40 minutes and some change. We can make it. I looked at the distance. I looked at the terrain data. I looked at the biometric indicators I had been running for the past 18 hours, the arm, the glucose, the accumulated physiological fatigue markers. Sergeant, we can make it, Threskel. Not reassurance. Not bravado. The flat, informational tone of someone who has assessed the math and is reporting the result. Copy, I said. I'll track you through the array. If the window starts closing early, I'll warn you. How long does the relay stay active? I checked, 9%. Long enough, I said. They moved. I have spent time, in the writing of these reports, trying to find language that conveys what it looks like on a long-range monitoring array when 4 humans move fast through rubble terrain under time pressure. I have not found it. The monitoring array produces position data and biometric traces and thermal signatures. It does not produce the thing that those data points represent, which is 4 people in sustained sprint across broken ground with everything they're carrying and everything they've been through, going to make it. I tracked them. I also tracked the Cathral patrol units closing the overlap in Sector 9 Bravo. The math was very tight. At 0701, I noted, unit on track. Window still open. 18 minutes. At 0708, unit on track. Window narrowing. Cathral Unit 3 has deviated from projected path. Recalculating. At 0709, deviated unit returning to pattern. False alarm. At 0712, window now 13 minutes. Unit needs to sustain current pace. At 0714, the relay junction's battery dropped to 5% and the signal degraded further and I lost clean communications with Ose Mensa. I still had the array. At 0718, unit visible at edge of Sector 9 Bravo approach. Window open. 8 minutes. At 0722, unit in Sector 9 Bravo. Window closing. 4 minutes. At 0724, the relay junction dropped to 2% and I sent a message that I was not certain was received. You're through. Window closing behind you. Continue south. You're clear. At 0726, the relay junction went offline. At 0726 and 30 seconds, the Cathral overlap closed in Sector 9 Bravo. I looked at the tracking data for a while. Then, I noted 0726. Unit 4FR clear of closure. 0 contact. All 4 individuals accounted for. Then, I noted, because I believe in complete records, battery 0%. 7%. When I'd pinged it. Not enough, on paper, for any of what had just happened. 11% when it had responded. I am not a systems engineer. I cannot explain the discrepancy. What I can say is that the relay junction at Sector 11 Delta, scheduled for decommissioning 14 weeks ago, held on long enough. I want to tell you about something that happened at 0728. 2 minutes after the closure. 2 minutes after I had confirmed the unit was clear and logged the outcome and made a note about the relay junction battery that I intended to include in a maintenance report and was going to hold for later. My monitoring array, still on maximum resolution for the southern sectors, picked up a signal. Not from the unit. From a secondary source in Sector 7C. I adjusted the array. It took me a moment to identify what I was seeing, because Sector 7C was supposed to be emptied, cleared by scouts, vacated by the unit, the child extracted at 0340. Nothing should have been generating a signal in Sector 7C. What was generating the signal was the small metallic object. The one Ose Mensa had used for the sequence. The one she had pushed toward the child. The one the child had carried out of the sector. Except she hadn't carried it out. The monitoring record shows the child entering the extraction team's transport with no metallic object in her possession. Which means at some point between learning the sequence and the extraction team's arrival, the child had left it. Set it down. Hidden it, maybe, in the way that children hide things they are uncertain about. I don't know if I get to keep this, so I'll leave it in the only place that feels like mine. In the corner of the overhang. Under the collapsed wall in Sector 7C. Where it had been sitting, all night, in the rain. And, now, at 0728, 2 minutes after 4 people had moved through a closing window and come out the other side, it was sitting in the debris generating the kind of low-level signal that a metallic object with a small power cell generates when something activates it. I enhanced the array. I ran the signal analysis. It was tapping. 3 short, 1 long, pause, 2 short. I sat very still for a long time. Let me tell you what it wasn't. It wasn't the child. The child was in the Relief Processing Center, in civilian aid, safe. It wasn't a signal from the unit, they were 2 sectors south and the object was not comms equipment. It wasn't a Cathral probe or a third auxiliary asset or any piece of equipment I had a record for. It was a small metallic object. A personal item. Something a soldier carries in a cargo pocket and takes out when she needs something to give a child a reason to listen. I ran the signal analysis 3 more times. 3 short, 1 long, pause, 2 short. The most likely technical explanation is that the power cell in the object had been partially dormant in the cold overnight and had reactivated in the morning temperature shift, and the reactivation had triggered some internal mechanism or recording, maybe a loop set in some idle mode that had been running on repeat since Ose Mensa had set it in the rubble and tapped the sequence for the first time. That is the most likely technical explanation. I wrote it in my notes. I left a space after it. The space is still there. At 0900, I received a communication from my commanding officer. I want to record, for anyone who reads this report after me, that my commanding officer is not a cruel person. She is a thorough person. She is a person who uses the phrase "please clarify your operational justification" in the same way that some people use a blunt instrument, not from malice but from a genuine belief that clarity is the solution to most problems, which is mostly true and occasionally spectacularly wrong. The communication said, Threskel. Status of Keth-4 water recycler. Per maintenance log, you were scheduled to depart yesterday. Your transit records show you are still at Zone 9 Auxiliary. Please clarify your operational justification for remaining in zone. I read this communication. I thought about how to respond. The accurate response was, I have been watching 4 humans and I cannot stop, and in the last 18 hours I have watched one of them give away the last thing she had to a child, and then stay with that child in the rain, and then run through a closing tactical window with 3 other people who chose to be there, and somewhere in all of that I have started to understand something that I have been trying to understand for 11 years and I am not done yet. I did not send that response. I sent, water recycler operational. Remained in zone for supplemental monitoring, Sector 7C, civilian extraction adjacent to active unit operations. Full account submitted as Addendum 7 and 8. Will depart on next available transit. Apologies for the delay. Her response came back in 4 minutes, review submitted. Continue current monitoring until departure. Well done. I read well done twice. It is possible she meant the water recycler. It is possible she had read the addenda. I decided not to ask. At 1340, the monitoring array picked up movement in Sector 7C. I was not, I want to be clear, specifically watching Sector 7C at 1340. I was completing my transit documentation and reviewing the incident report filing from the morning and eating something from the transit hub that was technically food and which I was consuming with the minimum level of engagement consistent with continued biological function. The alert was automatic. Movement in a flagged sector triggers an alert. The sector was flagged from the previous night's operations. I checked the array. 1 individual. Moving from the southern sectors. Moving north. I recognized the movement pattern before I confirmed the biometric trace. Ose Mensa. Alone. Moving with the focused, careful quality that I had been watching for 18 hours. But, different from yesterday, slower. Not injured slower. The slower of someone who was not operating under time pressure and has decided, for some reason, to come somewhere. She entered Sector 7C at 1353. She went to the overhang. She found the metallic object. I watched her pick it up. Turn it over. The monitoring resolution was sufficient to see the small changes in her posture that my notes have started to log as emotional processing, not any single gesture but the aggregated quality of stillness that precedes and follows the moments when something lands. She sat down in the rubble. Not for long. 3 minutes, approximately. Then, she stood up. She put the object back in her cargo pocket. She looked at the overhang, at the corner where the child had been, at the entrance, at the scuff marks in the dust. At 13:56, her comms activated. Vasquez Ortiz. Oh, say. Where are you? Not a question. The inflection of someone who knows where but is asking anyway. Sector 7. Yeah. A pause. I found it. Yeah. Another pause. She left it on purpose. Probably. Kids do that. Not explaining, stating. Like she'd thought about this. Leave something so there's something to come back to. Even if you never come back. Silence. That's, yeah. Vaz. Yeah. Tell Emeka I'll be back in 20. He already knows. Of course he does. Comms closed. Sergeant Osemensa stood in the rubble of Sector 7C, in what was left of a city, with a small metallic object in her cargo pocket that a child had left for someone to find. She started walking south. I am going to tell you something that is not in any official report. I am going to tell you because this account was submitted under oath and I believe that an account submitted under oath should be complete, and completeness requires the parts that don't fit in standard observation notation. When I first read the tactical incident report at 0641, when I first understood that the corridor was closed and the unit was moving toward it, there was 45 seconds before I started making calls. I told you that. I told you I sat there. What I sat with was this. The previous night, in the monitoring footage I had replayed 41 times, there is a moment, a small moment, 17 seconds, that I keep returning to in the way you return to something that has changed the texture of everything around it. It is at 2351 local. Middle of the night. The unit is holding in the sector, rain coming down, watch rotation active. Osemensa is not on watch. Watson Burke is posted, Vasquez Ortiz is sleeping, Private Ose is doing that thing with his head in his hands. Osemensa is sitting with her back against the wall of the overhang. She has the metallic object. She is not tapping a signal. She is turning it over in her hands, slowly, the way you handle something that has been somewhere significant. And, at 23:51, for 17 seconds, she is perfectly still. Not sleeping. Not scanning. Not doing anything that the tactical behavior models would have a category for. She is sitting with it. That's all. And, I watched those 17 seconds and, I thought about the ration bar at 15:08 and, the sequence at 16:14 and, the child falling asleep and, it's my turn to stay and, the relief center intake note saying possibly self-generated and, the relay junction holding on 7% and, the window that closed behind them at 0726, and, I thought about what it means that a soldier in contested rubble, exhausted and hungry, with scouts having swept her sector and, a corridor closing ahead of her, would spend 17 seconds perfectly still with a small metallic object in her hands. She was thinking about the child. Not strategically. Not tactically. Not in any way that produced a report or a plan or an operational output. She was thinking about the child because the child had been there, and was now somewhere safer, and the journey from one of those places to the other had run directly through this moment, this soldier, this sequence that wasn't anything except a reason to listen. And, I think I have thought about this since, and, I have not stopped, that those 17 seconds were the truest thing I observed in the entire 18-hour account. Not the sprint through Sector 9 Bravo. Not the sequence tapped back across the rubble. Not even the ration bar itself. 17 seconds of sitting with something. Knowing what it cost. Knowing what it was worth. Knowing the math the way she always does the math. More if I give it away. This is the last entry in the account of observation record Keth 4, Addenda 7, 8, and 9. I want to write something, as a final entry, that my commanding officer will be able to use. Something that fits in the observation record. Something that has an operational context and a tactical justification and that synthesizes the 18 hours into a form that the 3rd Auxiliary's Behavioral Analysis Division can process. I have been trying to write it for 40 minutes. What I have instead is this. I have been an observation officer for 11 years. I have watched dozens of species under conditions of resource scarcity and physical threat and collective crisis. I have filed 2,847 reports. I have documented species that abandon their wounded, species that cannibalize their own dead, species that will, under sufficient pressure, do things that are efficient in the way that a catastrophe is effective at achieving outcomes, at terrible cost. I have spent those 11 years building models of how living things behave when the math stops working in their favor. The models are good. They are accurate. They predict behavior across a significant range of species with an error margin that the Behavioral Analysis Division considers acceptable. The models do not predict humans. Not because humans are illogical. That is the wrong frame. Humans are not illogical. The logic is present. The math is happening. The math just produces different answers. A resource scarce? Give it to something smaller. A corridor closing? Sprint through on a 2% battery and hope. An empty overhang in the rain at midnight? Go back. A child who left a small thing so there was something to come back to? Pick it up. Carry it. The models produce the question, what does this being do when it has nothing left to give? The answer, for most species, involves some variation of, it stops giving. The answer, for humans, appears to be, it finds something else. I do not know what to do with that. I have filed 43 reports in the time since Sector 7C and I have not known what to do with it for a single one of them. It sits in my chest where the involuntary thing lies, the thing the child's sound started at 1447, and it has not moved. I think it may not move. I think, and I am going to write this in an official report under oath because I believe it is the most accurate observation I have ever made in 11 years of observation work. I think that is the point. End of Part 3. End of Observation Record Keth 4, Addenda 7, 8, 9. Filed for review, Behavioral Analysis Division, 3rd Auxiliary Corps. Personal note, appended I looked up the Guthrani concept again. The warmth of a fire you carry to the next cold place. I think there should also be a word for the person who didn't know they were cold until they saw the fire. I am working on finding it. I will file it under supplemental when I do. Frescal, appended, 0340 local, 2 days after the account concludes correction to Addendum 9, personal note. I asked a linguist. She said the word I'm looking for already exists in 3 languages. She declined to tell me which 3. She said I should find it myself. It means more, she said, if you go looking. I am going looking.